I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is Another Kingdom, performed by Michael Knowles. In the last episode, in Galliana, a mutant squirrel named Maud helped Austin escape from the castle dungeon. Chased by a horrific monster, Austin made his way through the sewers and emerged in the city of Eastrom. It was an ugly, oppressed place where partisans of the dethroned Queen Elinda are tortured to death while the crowds cheer. To his dismay, Austin found that he had fallen among those partisans. Attempting to leave the city on a borrowed stallion, he was instead transported back to LA, where the androgynous killer Kittenface had just abducted him at gunpoint. Now, Episode 7 of Another Kingdom.
I had almost forgotten all this. The kitten-faced killer in the backseat of my Nissan, the author, Sean Gunther, in his house, on the floor of his living room, dead, shot dead. All this inexplicable madness had been swept from my consciousness by the inexplicable madness back in Galliana. The guard and the executioner after me, the shit monster hunting me from the gutters, the work of keeping the lights of the protective fairies bright. I felt a wave of hysteria pass over me. It wasn't the gun that had killed Gunther, ready to fire into the base of my brain. It wasn't just the gun, anyway. It was everything. The whole lunatic situation. The lunatic thoughts in my own head. Shit monster. Fairy lights. Galliana. Christ, it had all seemed so real just 2 seconds ago. It had felt real, even smelled real. The death of the guard. Watching the guard destroyed as his screams were smothered in his throat by sewage. It had seemed totally real at the time. But now, all at once, it seemed like it must have been a dream, some sort of elaborate, subconscious, psychological metaphor for who the hell knows what. This, the killer, the corpse in the house, the gun at my neck, this was real. And yet this also seemed impossible, a nightmare. "Don't make me say things twice, baby boy," Kittenface said, tapping the back of my head with the gun barrel. "Get going. Follow the stang." The Mustang. Right. Billiard ball, the shaven-headed thug, was in the black Mustang just in front of me. The car was just now pulling away from the curb, speeding off with the screech of tires. I got the Nissan going and shot after him, following his red taillights through the darkness. I drove in silence at first. I was trying to reorient myself, to reassemble what was happening here in L.A. I tried to remember my talk with Sean Gunther. Another Kingdom. Ellen Evermore, her picture in his phone, it came back to me. She had read my script. She had wanted me to read her book, and then she had withdrawn it. Why? Global. That's all Gunther had been able to tell me before he passed out. That was his last word to me on the subject before his brutally casual murder. All these thoughts were vague and tangled, mixed up with other thoughts, flashbacks of my escape from the dungeon and my journey through Eastrom to the gate. I felt a sense of regret. I wished I could have used my time in that other world to give some thought to this one. Maybe I could have come up with a plan of escape, or figured out a way to smuggle a weapon from that dimension into the here and now. But how could I have? I'd been so desperate just to stay alive, just to get out from below ground without being devoured by the sewage creature from hell. There had simply been no time to think about anything else. So here I was, a prisoner again, helpless again, under threat of death again. I glanced up in the rearview mirror. Kittenface saw me and pursed his lips to send me a taunting little kiss. Mwah! Oh yeah, I remembered that too. His campy bullying and how it got under my skin. We traveled through the Hollywood Hills in purple darkness, on winding roads between trees made silhouettes by deep night. Now and then I stole a glimpse at the killer in the rear view. He was barely paying attention. He looked bored. He looked as relaxed and indifferent as he had when he flicked his wrist to snuff out Sean Gunther. "Where are we going?" I asked him. With an offhanded gesture, he thwacked me in the back of the head, hard enough to make me grunt. "Ow!" "You didn't ask Mama's permission to speak," he said. And he gave me a pout, as if this was all just some sort of flirty game between us. What a psycho. We came down onto level ground and cruised over to Sunset Boulevard. The late traffic on the strip was thinning. The Mustang up ahead of me passed smoothly under billboards and neon marquees. The colored lights played over my windshield as I followed. We headed toward Beverly Hills. I tried to think. What should I do? My eyes scanned the scene outside. What if I saw a cop? Could I honk the horn and try to get his attention? Could I leap out at the next red light and run for it? But that gun, the killer's gun. I remembered how it had held me frozen back at Gunther's house, how I'd stood there paralyzed by it while Kittenface tormented me. I hadn't had the courage to make a play then, and I doubted I had it now. I wished I had my fairy bodyguards swirling around me. I wished all I had to do was focus my mind and have their lights glow and protect me. But that world was worlds away, and who knew what fantastic territory of my obviously broken brain. The best I could do here was try to concentrate as I had back there, try to focus through my fear and clear my mind. I did. I let the anxiety come off me like steam. I steadied my thoughts. Once I took the heightened emotion out of it, I could see things more clearly. I couldn't risk an escape attempt, even if I had the nerve. Kittenface was too crazy. He might blow me away in a fit of pique and then take his chances in a shootout with the police. No. The best I could do for now was try to get some information out of him. Try to get a better picture of the situation I was in. It might cost me a few more raps to the skull, but it would give me a sense of what was possible. He obviously had orders to bring me in, so he wasn't going to shoot me if he could help it. At least I didn't think he would. "So how come you killed him?" I asked into the mirror. Kittenface seemed surprised that I dared to speak to him again. I waited for him to give me another swat with the gun barrel. He didn't. Not right away, anyhow. I pushed on. "I'm just curious. You're looking for the book, right? Another Kingdom. Isn't that what you're after?" In the rear view, I saw the killer consider me. He narrowed his eyes. He pursed his lips to make his high cheeks hollow. Did he want to shut me up, or did he want to talk a little to pass the time? I met his gaze in the reflection, and he met mine. I was surprised by my own cool. So was he, I think. I think that's what decided him. "Well," he answered, "Daddy wants it." "Daddy? Your father?" He gave an elaborate feminine roll of his eyes. Not his father, of course not. His boss, his man. Daddy. I nodded. I shifted my eyes back to the windshield. I followed the Mustang's tail lights away from the bright lights of the strip and on into the grassier stretch of the boulevard. "I get it," I said. "So that's what I mean. If Daddy wants the book, why kill Gunther? He's the last one who saw it, isn't he?" He gave me a girlish little shrug with his narrow shoulders. "Maybe I just wanted to." I looked at him in the rear view. "I like killing men," he said. "Men especially. They think they're so there, you know. Then pow! They're gone. They're nothing." He wrinkled his nose at me as if he'd said something cute. "Uh-huh," I said. I tried to keep what I felt out of my voice. It wasn't easy. The guy was a horror show. But you couldn't kill him if Daddy didn't want you to, right? "Don't talk about Daddy," said Kittenface, and his kitten face darkened as he said it. So I didn't talk about Daddy. He turned away and looked out the window at the passing mansions on their acres of grass. "We knew what he knew," he murmured, as if explaining it to himself. "There was no point in leaving a loose end. We only kept him alive till now in the hope he would draw out someone like you." Up ahead, through the windshield, I saw the Mustang turn right off Sunset. I followed him onto dark residential streets. The road began rising steeply. Someone like me, I thought. Someone... "How did you know?" I said. "It was me you were following, not Gunther. How did you know I was looking for the book?" He gave me a sidelong look, raising an eyebrow. He lifted his gun and pressed the muzzle to his lips. Shh. It was a secret. We traveled uphill, past fine homes and lofty estates. We rose higher and higher above the city. I thought it over as I drove. I thought, it must have been my search. I had searched for Another Kingdom on my phone when I was recovering at Jane Janeway's house from that sword blow to my head. Then, when I got home, the Mustang showed up outside my building. They must have seen the search somehow. How else would they have known I was looking for the book? And then, my phone. After I had lost them on the freeway, they must have gone into my phone and found my call to Sean Gunther. Or maybe they had put a tracker on my car. These thoughts made me sick inside, sick and cold. Who were these people anyway? The government? The police? Foreign spies? Crazed super hackers? Who else could monitor a search engine waiting for someone to look up a book? Who else could break into your phone and find out where you were going just like that? And who else could kill a man just like that without worrying about the consequences? That thought made me sick too. If they had killed Sean Gunther because they knew everything he knew, and if they were taking me somewhere to question me, what would they do to me when the questioning was over, when they knew everything I knew too? You didn't need heavy math to figure that one out. The wave of hysteria began to rise in me again. I caught it, forced it down. I focused, just like I'd learned to do in the sewers of Galiana. I made my mind dark. I let the fear go. Incredibly, it worked. There were no fairy lights, no magical protection, but it calmed me down anyway. I glanced out the window. I had no idea where we were anymore. High in the Beverly Hills somewhere, and even beyond. We turned and turned again. The roads got smaller, steeper, higher. Now, a few yards away, the Mustang turned into a driveway and came to a stop before a large filigreed iron gate. The gate swung in. The Mustang went through. I followed in my shabby Nissan, the gates looming over me. Then both cars, the Mustang and mine, began the climb up a long, winding lane. The moon became visible over the far horizon. The moonlight and the city light bleached away the stars. Up into the night we went, a long way with nothing but grass and trees on either side of us, no signs of habitation. This was bad. Bad twice, at least twice. One, it was deserted up here, so that was bad because with no one in sight and no houses, there'd be no one to witness what happened to me, no one to call for help. And two, this was expensive property, which was bad because it meant whoever owned it was rich, really rich, and probably powerful. Rich and powerful enough to have Sean Gunther killed without a qualm, and so therefore plenty rich and powerful enough to erase a minor character like me. So who? I began to ask. But Kitten Face said, "Shh, quiet now, Peachy Poo. I want to deliver you undamaged if I can." Man, oh man, I had to give it to him. The guy had a way of getting under my skin. Every time he pulled that Sweetie Peaches shit on me, I wanted to rip his head off with my bare hands. I drove up and up after the Mustang, and with a start, I suddenly realized we were not alone. There were people here, dark figures lurking by the side of the road. They were guards. They were patrolling the hilltop. They were holding rifles on their hips. They were dressed in black. They were almost invisible in the night. Then a house hove into view above them. It was a fine, modern ranch, built to seem a part of the hillside, constructed on a long, rolling line. It fit the contours of the setting exactly. It was fashioned of brown stone and tan stucco, surrounded by brush, lit by soft spotlights. The indoor and the outdoor spaces blended one into the other. I could see a dining room without walls leading into an enclosed den with a fire blazing in an enormous hearth. The den had glass doors, and the glass doors led out again onto a broad, flat patio of clay-colored brick. The Mustang stopped on the wide pavement before a 4-car garage. I stopped behind it. A black-clad rifleman stepped up to the Nissan's door. "Out you get, baby boy," Kitten Face said. I opened the door and climbed out into the cool of the autumn night. Billiard Ball was already out of the Mustang. He had crossed his arms over his chest and was watching the scene with lidded eyes. Kitten Face emerged from the car behind me. He tossed his fluffy blonde hair and slipped his pistol into his windbreaker. He winked at the rifleman and gave him one of those purse-lipped kisses. The rifleman was a bearded, hard-eyed military type. I saw him curl his lip with annoyance, but he didn't say anything. I wondered if he was afraid of the psycho, too. What happened next took me by surprise, but maybe it shouldn't have. It had been a long night and a long day, in this world and the other. I'd been roughed up and chased down, slapped around, and forced to witness a murder by a crazy-as-fuck assassin who treated me like his catamite. Now I was heading who knew where to face who knew what, and I was trying to stay focused, trying to keep my attention trained outward on the situation around me, and not inward on my own mental state. I guess I didn't realize just how jacked up and pissed off I was. The rifleman said to me, "This way." He gestured with his head toward the open-air dining space. There was no one there now, but the long table was set with 2 places. It was lit by candle globes and an elegant chandelier. Beyond it was the cliff and the city lights and the moon hanging in the dark blue sky, making the setting spectacular. It was a good guess that Daddy was on his way and would be joining me for dinner. I began walking toward the house over a slate path, focusing my mind, controlling my breath, taking in my surroundings. The rifleman walked a half-step behind me. Billiard Ball was trailing somewhere off to my left. I'd lost sight of Kitten Face. The rifleman kept his weapon on his hip, pointed upward. He wasn't worried about me making a run for it. Where would I go? We were on the highest peak of Mount Nowhere, and there were men with guns in every direction. So that was the scenario. I was about halfway along the path to the dining space. Then, for no reason other than that's the kind of punk he was, Kitten Face stepped up behind me and gave me a slap on the ass. "Hurry up now, little one," he chided me. I turned around and punched him. I didn't mean to do it. That is, I did mean to do it, of course I did. You can't slug a guy that way by accident. What I mean is, I didn't intend to do it. I didn't think about doing it before I did. If I had, believe me, I would have stopped myself. He was a stone-hearted killer, after all, with a gun under his jacket. But he did what he did, and I did what I did, and there it was. I came around fast, and my fist came with me. I'd never hit anyone before. I'd never been in a fight in my life. I had no training, but it didn't matter. Where he was walking and the way I had to turn to get at him, our positions created a perfect punch. Hips, arm, fist. Boom. My knuckles connected with his cheek, dead on. His face was soft. It didn't hurt my hand at all. And he was in good shape and fierce and all that, but when it came down to it, he was a girly little guy and there wasn't much to him. The blow sent him spinning sideways and he dropped to the ground. He propped himself up on one elbow right away, but then he just stayed there, staring, conscious but dazed. I gaped down at him, shocked at myself. I glanced at the rifleman. He had his tongue stuck in his cheek as if to keep from laughing. I glanced over at Billiard Ball. He was standing still, blinking. I think he was as shocked as I was. "Humph," I heard him say. That was putting it mildly. My predicament had already been bad, but it was bad squared now, maybe bad cubed. There was no point in trying to run away. One of the riflemen would shoot me down or tackle me. There was nothing to do but stand there until Kitten Face recovered. Then what? He was sure to kill me. Or beat me senseless. Or beat me senseless and then kill me. Whatever, it wasn't going to be pleasant. So we stood there, the rifleman, Billiard Ball, and me. We stared down at Kitten Face, all of us. After a while, Kitten Face shook his head. The fog cleared from his eyes. He looked around. He looked at me. He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was a smile that sent a chill from my balls to my brain pan. "Oh," he said in a throaty whisper. "Oh, oh, oh." With that, like some sort of supernatural feline beast, he leapt to his feet in a single swift motion. I caught my breath, waiting helplessly for whatever would come. Kitten Face took a slow step toward me. His smile became a full-fledged killer grin, mirthless and furious. "Oh," he said again, drawing it out this time. He took another step and came up close. Just then, a blinding light struck all of us. A vibrant, guttural stuttering filled the air. The stuttering grew swiftly louder until, in another moment, it became a thunderous roar. Kitten Face froze, his smile faltering. A murderous fury flamed in his eyes. His fists clenched at his sides. His hair, my hair too, began blowing wildly in a newly risen wind. He stayed where he was, but he didn't attack me. Something had made him hesitate. The hilltop grew brighter, louder. The wind rose higher. I lifted my eyes. A helicopter was descending out of the night sky. It seemed to have come from nowhere. It seemed to be heading directly toward us. The wind off the rotor blades was blowing over us. The noise enveloped us. The chopper's spotlight grew brighter and brighter. I lowered my eyes to the assassin again. His face was red where I had punched him and red where I had not punched him too, just red with passionate rage. His grin was forced and savage now. His eyes were white-hot. He spoke to me. His mouth moved anyway, but the words were washed away in the chopper noise. It didn't matter. I knew what he was saying, more or less. He was telling me what he was going to do to me, what unimaginable thing, the very first chance he got. But not right now. The helicopter continued its descent, and as my perspective on it changed, I could see it was coming down not on top of me, but on the patio over there just beyond the den. As I was watching it, the black-clad rifleman caught my attention with a gesture. He tilted his head. "Follow me." There was still a little humorous quirk at the corner of his mouth. He'd enjoyed watching Kitten Face get punched. I think he wanted to get me away from him as quickly as possible. I followed him to the patio. The chopper wind grew stronger, the noise grew louder, and the light grew brighter and then dimmer as it narrowed on the point just beneath the craft. With a wobbling tremor, the copter touched down. The engine kept running and the rotors kept spinning. The door slid open and out stepped a little man, ducking his head beneath the turning blades. Daddy. He was old and bent and exceptionally short. 4 foot something probably, maybe 5 foot nothing, but not more than that. He was wearing a dark suit, the jacket flapping in the rotor wind. Since his head was bent, all I could see of him was a fine crop of unruly silver hair, and his hands, which were so wrinkled they seemed made of crumpled paper. Then he came out from under the rotors and looked up. Big surprise. I had never seen him before in the flesh, but I recognized him all right. From pictures in the news and from the framed photographs on the mantelpiece in my parents' living room back home, and others on the wall of my brother's fabulous New York apartment. Because my father held the Orozco Chair in Psychology at Berkeley, and my brother worked for the Orozco Institute, and hell, even I worked for Global Studios, which Orozco owned. And lo and behold, here he was right in front of me, my father's benefactor, my brother's mentor, my own employer, Serge Orozco. It's strange to say, but I'd never given much thought to Orozco. You'd think I would have, wouldn't you? His presence wound like a golden chain through my family. My father's chair at the university was named for him. My brother's institute was run by him. My own job was financed by him. Even my mother had gotten grants from his foundation to write a couple of her books. When you think about it, even my sister Riley took his money if you count the handouts she got from my parents, which ultimately, one way and another, came from him. Yet somehow, though I had been vaguely aware of his existence since I was little, I had never really considered him as a person, real, with skin on. He was just too far above me somehow, too rich, too powerful, more an influence than an individual, more an atmosphere than a man. Now, though, here he was walking toward me, and it was disorienting to see him in his humanity, to say the least. He was ancient yet vital, for all his years, a casual, confident, even youthful figure. He wore no tie, just a white shirt open at his wattled throat. His face beneath the silver hair was square and very pale, the skin almost transparent where it wasn't pocked with liver spots. His cheeks weren't wrinkled much. I guess he'd had some cosmetic surgery. They were weirdly smooth, as if he were wearing a plastic mask. His pale blue eyes were wide the way very old men's eyes get wide. Smooth cheeks and wide eyes. The overall effect made him look kind of like an infant, a perpetual baby perpetually startled by the brand new world. As the chopper gave a wobble and lifted up into the sky behind him, the old man offered me his hand. Dazed by his presence, I took it, looking down at him from my greater height. His hand was cold and dry like a lizard's skin. The chopper tilted and shot away. The wind around us subsided. The noise grew dimmer. "Austin, good to finally meet you," Orozco said. He had a faint, romantic-sounding accent. I couldn't quite place it. "Come, sit with me. We'll eat." He walked toward the dining area. The rifleman met him along the way. Orozco touched his shoulder in a paternal manner as the big soldierly man leaned down and spoke low in his ear. Orozco nodded, glanced at me. "Go on ahead. I'll be right with you," he said. He walked off to where Kittenface was standing apart from us. The killer had not moved to greet the chopper, but was still where we had left him on the path. He was sulking like a child, kicking the slate of the path with the ball of one foot. Orozco gently took his chin in his fingers and tilted his face so he could examine the place where I'd punched him. He murmured some consoling words. He patted his cheek, then sent him off toward the house with another pat on his backside. I, meanwhile, moved to the open dining area, stealing glances over my shoulder at the conference between the billionaire and the murderer as I went. To say I was confused, to say I was stunned, to say my head was spinning is not to say enough. Thoughts were whirling through my mind like tornadoes. In the last, was it even 24 hours? I had seen sights beyond believing. I had traveled from world to world in ways I couldn't, in ways no one could understand. I had seen a man's head ripped off by a one-eyed ogre. I had seen a man shot dead by an androgyne psychopath. I had seen a man torn to pieces by a monster made of shit. Made of shit! Yet somehow my brain had managed to incorporate all that into its conception of the possible. But this, my father's benefactor, my brother's mentor, my own employer, the founder of my family's feast, the friend of presidents, the owner of media outlets, the funder of political campaigns and charities and popular movements. And he was the one who had brought me here at gunpoint. He was the one who had dispatched that murderer to snuff out Sean Gunther like a candle. I couldn't take it in right away. Not fully, but I understood that somehow the entire story of my life had just been rewritten. As if in a dream, I stepped up onto the platform where the table was set. I waited there for Orozco to walk back through the night to me. It occurred to me in the midst of my confusion that when I had searched for Another Kingdom on my phone, I had used the OG search engine. OG, that name, it was a cute little way of branding the engine as part of the Orozco Empire. That confirmed my suspicions about how they knew to come after me. They had been monitoring the engine, Orozco's engine, waiting for someone to make the search. The little old man stepped up onto the dining platform with me. He lay a paternal hand on my shoulder as he had with the guard. He smiled a charming smile. It was almost possible to forget that he had had a man killed in cold blood. Almost possible. Sit, he said. We sat. Me at the foot of the table and him at the head, the candles and the chandelier burning brightly in between. A refreshing breeze came in from every side and was toasted to a mellow perfection by the outdoor heaters. It was a charming place to dine. There were several courses, everything very delicate and delicious, an elaborate mix of lettuces with pralines and chèvre and pears, thin pastries filled with meat-like somethings and shredded vegetables with an exquisite sauce, strawberries dipped in chocolate for dessert, each course brought to the table by a brace of waiters who seemed to shimmer in and out of the shadows as if they were shadows themselves. Through it all, there was wine, too, a rich red wine so good and so refreshing I had to exert all my will to keep from drinking myself silly. I had to keep reminding myself that I was dining with a billionaire who had men snuffed out with casual indifference. It seemed wise to keep my wits about me. So we ate and drank, and all the while Orozco talked ceaselessly. I remembered my brother Rich had said something to me about this once. Billionaires talk, they don't listen, he had told me, ruefully, but not without humor and affection. It's true of every billionaire I've ever met. It's what their money buys them, the right to hold forth. Why shouldn't they? They know they're smarter than you. If they're not smarter, how come they have so much more money? Myself, I'd never met any billionaires before, so I had no way of knowing if Rich's observation applied to the breed in general or just to this guy. But it sure applied to this guy. All through dinner, his monologue rambled on and on, almost without pause. Rich had made this billionaire logorrhea sound like an endearing eccentricity. It wasn't. It was unpleasant. First, because of the monotony, the one voice droning. Even a billionaire ought to shut the hell up and let someone else say something now and then. Second, because of the suspense. He'd already had one man killed tonight for not having the answers he wanted. What was he going to do to me, and how long would I have to wait to find out? And third, after he'd gone on for a while, it became clear to me that Serge Orozco, the founder of my father's chair, the leader of my brother's institute, the owner of the studio where I worked, was not just evil, but batshit crazy too. Memory. Fascinating, the old man was saying. He rolled the red wine in his bowl-like glass so that its mulberry depths reflected the yellow candlelight. As one gets older, one begins to suspect that many of the things one remembers may not be, strictly speaking, true. Essential, even formative chapters of one's biography may be whole-cloth inventions. And yet, if these false memories shaped you, aren't they real enough? Real enough to have an effect on the world, at any rate? I nodded attentively, because it felt like nodding attentively was my role here. But I was not attentive, not really. I was too busy wondering whether I was going to die tonight, and wondering also what it meant to my own memories to realize that my entire family had been in orbit around this murderer since I was a child. I couldn't process that and listen to him and fear for my life all at the same time. Orozco took another sip of wine. I had to wait in silence for him to continue. I picked at my meat-filled, what was it called? Phyllo pastry, that's it. Just to have something to do. Finally, the billionaire emerged from his glass with a satisfied gasp. He continued. A perfect example. I remember, at least I seem to remember, A conversation I had many years ago. A conversation with a strange, pale, starved, rather monkish person wearing a sort of robe with I watch him. He drew a circle around his head with his free hand, trying to describe what he meant. A cowl, just like a monk would wear. Who could he have been? What was the occasion? I no longer know. I remember we were in my dacha outside of Moscow, so it must have been before I emigrated, but after the fall of the Soviet Union, because I must have already made my fortune in the privatization, you see. And we were speaking about that, about one's aspirations, one's ambitions. What's left to strive for after one has made so much money that any more would make no difference? He bowed low over his plate. His wizened hands worked his knife and fork. He lifted a bite straight to his mouth in the European fashion. He went on talking even as he chewed. I can remember we talked all night, sitting side by side before the fire. But the words themselves, they're faded, vague. Was I describing my desires, or was he offering me advice? I'm not sure. But at some point, one of us articulated a vision, call it. The idea that one might write one's name upon the human singularity. One might be enshrined in every grateful heart forever as the architect of the era of perfected man. The Orozco Age. He said these words with irony, but there was no irony in his wide, bright, infant eyes, neither the first time he said them, nor when he repeated them again. The Orozco Age, savoring them on his tongue as he had savored the wine. What would it cost? That was the gist of the conversation. To be that man. What would I be willing to give in the reckoning? Somewhere during this soliloquy we finished the main course. 2 waiters appeared from the edge of night, removed our plates, and evanesced. I couldn't help but be aware that every bite, every course brought us closer to the end of dinner. It was like watching the sand run out of an hourglass. And what would happen then? The next time I lifted my wine, I couldn't hide the fact my hand was trembling. Orozco, meanwhile, dabbed his lips with his napkin, sat back in his chair. Somehow he managed to seem relaxed and intense at the same time. My point is, that conversation. I can't remember who it was with or when exactly it happened, or even if it truly did happen. And yet, it set the entire direction of my life from that point forward, which makes it real enough. And now, of course. He made a nonchalant gesture, tilting his head, lifting his hand, as if he were confessing some charming vulnerability. Now that I am approaching the end of my life, it comes back to me. He comes back to me. In dreams. Or are they dreams? A figure in the corridor. A face in the mirror that is not my face. Someone standing behind me. Even his voice. Indistinguishable whispers at first. Old age, I told myself. But they're louder each time. More real. More insistent. The reckoning. The debt must be paid. Again, 2 waiters oscillated in from nowhere and set the chocolate-covered strawberries before us. And when they had vibrated back into nothingness, Orozco lifted his wine glass again and said, I need that book, Austin. I don't know whether I'd been mesmerized by the monotony of his jabber or whether I'd lost the train of his thought or what, but those words took me off guard completely. They rang in that charming hilltop dining space like a bell, like a great tower bell knelling the hour of decision. Whatever clouds of inattention had gathered in my consciousness, they were shaken away and gone, all gone, just like that. I sat there. I stared at him. I thought, what has he been saying all this time? I didn't know. It had seemed random, meditative, half meaningless, and now it turned out to be... What? His explanation of why I was here? Of why he had had Sean Gunther killed? Of why he would kill me after we'd enjoyed the chocolate-covered strawberries? The book was all I could choke out, echoing him. And though I had tried to go easy on the wine, I had to drink some now to keep the inside of my mouth from going dry as dust. He nodded, still leaning back, still relaxed, and also not relaxed, intense, his eyes so wide, so bright that I wondered if he was afraid too, maybe even more afraid than I was. Another kingdom. You were searching for it, Austin. Why? It was at this point I felt a presence behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a billiard ball standing just beyond the dining space in the half-lit dark. He had his arms crossed on his chest and his eyes trained on my head. Dull, merciless, strangely witty eyes, judging just where he would strike when it came time to deal me pain. I faced Orozco again, licking what felt like ashes off my lips. It was submitted to me to read at Mythos, where I work. I know where you work. But it was withdrawn before I had a chance to read it. I know that too. How did he know that? Could he look into my e-reader? I figured he could. Who submitted it? He asked. Do you know? Sean Gunther. It hurt to speak the author's name to the man who had had him executed. But he did it at the request of the author, Ellen Evermore. That's what he told me. She submitted it, and she decided to withdraw it? Orozco asked. That's what he said. I knew he was about to ask me why she had withdrawn it, and in the second before he did ask, I suddenly realized why. Global. That's what Gunther had said when I asked him. She must have realized that by submitting the book to Mythos, she had sent the book into the realm of Global Studios and therefore within the grasp of Orozco. That had to be it. She knew he was after it, and she didn't want him to have it. Why? Said Orozco. Why did she withdraw it? I hesitated. Should I tell him what I thought? I remembered the photograph of Ellen Evermore in Gunther's phone. I remembered the serenity and humor and wisdom in her face. I looked at the desiccated, surprised baby face of the billionaire across from me. Not hard to tell who the good guys and bad guys were in this story. Not hard to know which side to be on. I don't know, I lied. Because fuck him. He was probably going to kill me no matter what I said. And why did you search for it? Well, that was the question, wasn't it? How far would I get into my absurd tale of being transported to Galiana before billiard ball knocked me senseless? Luckily, I remembered the story I'd made up to use on Candy Fillikin at the office. I used it again. The book stuck with me. What little I'd read, I thought it might make a good movie. I'd been looking for a new direction. Because your agent rejected your last script. God, he knew everything. One misguided lie and he'd catch me cold. That's right, I said. And is that the only reason? Yeah, sure. What else could there be? I thought I saw an expression of frustration, maybe anger across his plastic mask of a face, but it was gone in a moment. And so you went to Sean Gunther, he said. That's right. But he couldn't tell you where the book was or where the author was. He didn't know. No, he didn't. And so you don't know. Well, now we were right down to it, weren't we? This was the point in the conversation where Gunther had been shot dead for not knowing the answer to Orozco's question. I wanted to ask if I was going to be shot dead too, but it seemed such a weak, pathetic thing to say. So instead I said, your man, or whatever he is, the girly guy with the cat face. Sarah. Sarah? Sarah, short for Seraphim, an old Russian name. I gave it to him when he was a child. For some reason, these words sickened me, but fortunately I didn't have time to figure out why. He killed him, I said. Gunther. Sarah shot him. Orozco never took his over-wide baby blue eyes off me. He picked up his wine without looking away, drank without looking away. He said. He does that. When I ask him to. Sometimes when I don't. He put the wine down again, still without looking at anything but me. Man, those eyes were wide. I think he likes it, really. I think he pretends the victim is me. Daddy issues. Why? Does it trouble you? His killing Mr. Gunther. Well, it is murder, I managed to say. He shrugged. Murder. Don't be a small man, Austin. We're talking about big things. Humanity perfected. The world that is to be. The Orozco age, I thought, trying to put the pieces of this insane conversation together. Sarah says you struck him, Orozco said. I did. That was unwise. I didn't plan it. I wasn't thinking. He made me angry. Ha! Yes, he can do that. But unfortunately, he wishes to kill you now. Actually, killing you is only the last thing he wishes to do to you. Since he raised the issue, this seemed like a good time to ask the question that was really foremost in my mind. Are you going to let him? Kill me? Is that what this is all about? I indicated the table between us. My last supper? Orozco seemed to give the issue a moment of serious consideration. The truth is, I can't always control what he does. Our relationship is complex. The moral authority shifts back and forth, depending on who committed the latest sin against whom. He leaned forward, pinning me in my seat with a no-nonsense glare. He rapped the tabletop with his index finger. But I do want that book, Austin, and he knows that. Well, that was clear enough. If I gave him what he wanted, he might be able to talk Kitten Boy out of revenge. Maybe. For a while. I don't know what I can do, I said. I've told you everything I know. There was a soft shifting sound behind me. Orozco's eyes lifted to the place where I knew Billiard Ball was. Almost imperceptibly, the billionaire shook his head. No. Whatever the bald thug was about to do to me, he didn't do. Orozco plucked a chocolate-covered strawberry from the dessert cup before him. He lifted it to his eyes and examined it. A jeweler with a gem, or maybe a cat with a mouse. Your family have been friends of mine for a long time, Austin, he said. These words sickened me too, sickened me more, and chilled me. Is that just a coincidence? The question occurred to me so suddenly I asked it without thinking. That they know you, work for you, and I got the book? Did that just happen? I doubt it, he said, and he ate the strawberry. But that's not my point, he said around the mouthful. He swallowed. My point is only that I want to be your friend too. I want you to be my friend, like your father and mother and brother are. I don't want anything unpleasant to happen to you, son. Unpleasant like with Gunther, I said. Nothing unpleasant happened to Mr. Gunther until there was no longer any chance that he could help me. Is there still any chance that you could help me, Austin? By this time, I felt I was beginning to make some sort of sense of things, to fashion some sort of narrative out of it. It was such a bizarre narrative, so bizarre and so surreal, that it was hard for me to take it seriously. This long-ago man with the cowl he'd talked about, for instance, was he real? And if he was, what exactly was the conversation they had had all night by the Dhaka fireplace? What was this mysterious reckoning that was coming? Would finding the book somehow keep it at bay? And did I have some cosmic part to play in the whole thing? Or was I just a fool who had been sucked into the whirlpool of his delusions? This must be a very valuable book, I said. His surprised baby eyes looked even more surprised and more babyish. A thing is worth what someone is willing to pay for it, he said. So for me, yes, in this case, it's priceless. Which brings me back to my original question. Do you think there's any chance you might be able to recover another kingdom for me? He was watching me closely as I thought over my answer. Not that there was any question what my answer would be. We both knew I was going to say yes. Yes, I would try to find the book for him. What else could I say? He had made it clear he would have me killed if I refused. The only real mystery was whether I would be lying or not when I said it. That's what he was watching me so closely for. That's what he wanted to see. Yes, I said. I'll do my best anyway. And yes, I was lying. That is, I was going to go on looking for the book. I had to. It was my only hope of explaining my interworldly condition, my only hope of curing it before I got myself killed by some fantastic Gallianan beast or other. But if I did find the book, there was no chance I would give it to him. Not willingly, anyway. Whatever trouble Orozco had gotten himself into with the cowl guy, I'd be damned if I was going to ransom him out of it. He continued to study me for a long moment after I spoke. Did he believe me? Could he tell what I was thinking? He had hacked into my search engine after all, and my phone records and my e-reader. Could he hack into my mind as well? Could he tell I was not like my parents and my brother, that I was not his friend but his enemy? Good, he said finally. And this unfortunate Gunther business, let's put that out of our minds for now, all right? What could I say? I nodded. And for my part, Orozco continued, I will do my best to keep Sarah from acting out her anger on you. I'd appreciate that. He is volatile. I can't guarantee a thing. Neither can I. His smile was mirthless and razor-thin. Well, he said softly. It was all he needed to say. It was a threat of death. Fail to find the book, and you die. Go to the police about Gunther, and you die. That simple. And with that, my dinner with Orozco was over. The next moment, he gestured to the bald thug in back of me. And the moment after that, the bald thug stepped forward and slapped my car keys down on the table where my plate had been. Jingle whap. Now, a potent mixture of too much wine and sudden relief and sneaking, gut-curdling suspense swam up into my head. I felt as if I was in a hazy, slow-mo dream as I walked along the slate path back to my Nissan. It wasn't a good dream either, because I was thinking about how, in the gangster movies, they always pretended to let you go just before they garroted you and sent you to sleep with the fishes. I glanced over at Orozco's ranch, and just inside, a shadow within the shadows, there stood the figure of the assassin, his kitten face barely visible within the darkness. And on that face, and in his eyes, I saw what anyone could see, his daydreams of my blood-soaked agony and my agonizing death. I reached the car. I checked the back seat quickly to make sure no one was hiding there with a garrote. I pulled open the door and slipped inside. "Oh, shit!" I shouted furiously. I was seated on the black stallion again. I was back in Galiana.
This has been Another Kingdom by Andrew Klavan, performed by Michael Knowles.